everyone. Welcome back to Utility Sports, and we have breaking news on a big-time change in the NBA when it comes to who is a head coach and who is not, as the Milwaukee Bucks have fired head coach Mike Budenholzer following a disappointing end to their season against, of course, the Miami Heat in the first round, and obviously a crazy change of events for something that we just were not quite expecting here at Utility Sports. I was not ready for this type of move. One that just honestly, I think is kind of a little confusing and puzzling to me. I understand, definitely a tough way to end the season, but still, Mike Budenholzer is a coach that won an NBA championship with the Milwaukee Bucks. And just given the circumstances, like his brother died during the series, right? Like right when it was going on. And the fact that there's no slack here is pretty concerning to me, honestly, from Milwaukee's ownership standpoint. Now, I'm not saying Bud was the perfect coach, and I understand some of the basketball decisions, but like if you think that there wasn't an impact there with the timing of everything and how Mike Budenholzer was trying to coach through some of this, it's pretty puzzling for me, just because I think Mike Budenholzer is a pretty solid coach. He does a lot of the nice stuff that you need to do to just at least be a competitive team and a competent team. He cleans up all of the really simple issues for a lot of teams. And the fact that they just fired him, not that it's not a good long-term move, because I think that there's some candidates out there that do make some sense, including an in-house candidate, Charles Lee, who's getting a lot of interest around the league right now. I think the Pistons are probably zeroing in on him. But I think the Bucks would probably be open to him becoming the head coach of the franchise as well. There's also Nick Nurse out there. There's a lot of different people who are qualified candidates out for the position, but I'm just pretty shocked that the Milwaukee Bucks dismissed Mike Budenholzer this quickly, especially given the circumstances of what was actually going on in his personal life and some of the situation, just the way that it played out. I know that the Bucks did not have a competitive postseason. I understand completely that it was a disappointing end to the year, no matter what Giannis may say in a post-game press conference. But you just, I just don't think you can just simply look past the personal side of things here and say that, well, nothing was going on. Something very significantly was going on. Spiral here says he has been a bad coach since Atlanta. Yeah, the place where he won 60 games with Paul Millsap as his best player. Yeah, okay. Makes a good system, but makes no adjustment that hurt his team in the playoffs every year. Giannis bailed him out in 2021. I mean, okay, you can say that. I'd love to know what you think about a bunch of other coaches around the league. Like, the star players bail them out all the time if you're winning championships. That's the point of having a star player, is to go out there and make plays and bail your coach out, bail your team out when you need them to. I get what you're saying, but I just don't necessarily agree with that. I think Mike Budenholzer is a fine coach, and you can't just consistently win 50 to 60 games and not be considered like a pretty good coach, especially when you've done it in two places. And I think he did it with an undermanned lineup, an undermanned roster back when he was coaching the Atlanta Hawks, in my opinion. David here says, way too early to take. My San Antonio Spurs will scoop him up as second in commander, and he will take over after Pop, since he's from the Pop coaching tree. That's probably one of the high potential landing spots for him. And Spiral here as well, addressing this. I mean, he's won multiple playoff series. So I know everyone's going to point to 2021 as like he won one championship, whatever. He's advanced in the playoffs multiple times, and some of his runs, especially in Atlanta, were ended by LeBron James, who ended everybody's runs in the Eastern Conference back when he was still with the Cavaliers. And obviously before then, too, he was doing that. But most specifically with Mike Budenholzer. Nick, welcome to the stream. Glad to have you in here. And this is just absolutely shocking what's going on with Mike Budenholzer being fired by the Milwaukee Bucks. Again, I think the biggest issue I have with this is not that there's not better candidates out there. I think Nick Nurse is just a better coach than Mike Budenholzer. I would prefer him to be the coach over Budenholzer. But it just seems like they're drawing the line and using this first round exit as the reason as to why. But at the same time, I think that you just can't overlook the fact that literally his brother died while he was trying to coach in the postseason. And you can't just act like that doesn't have some type of impact. I mean, imagine you with whatever situation, like at work, do you think your work's going to be a little bit more complicated having all this stuff in your personal life going on? 110% it is. And like what True Talk's saying here is I'm very surprised by this decision by Milwaukee's ownership and by John Horst, their GM. I'm very surprised by this because it seems a little premature. I know it's definitely a disappointing season, but he literally just racked up the first seed in the Eastern Conference, and had something not like this not happened, maybe there would have been maybe a little bit more attention to detail and maybe some other things going on the court that would have played out in a different way. And I just don't like this for the Milwaukee Bucks in terms of the actual outlook on how this has impacted the short term. I get it, disappointing into the season, but you can't just all of a sudden do all of this crazy stuff. Craig here says Nurse also isn't that creative offensively. What's he supposed to do? His best player spins every play. Like, I'm sorry, but Pascal Siakam not the guy to be creative with. He has a whole bunch of forwards. Blame Masai Ujiri and maybe give him a shooter next time. Here we have a comment saying if they're smart, get Kenny Atkinson. Kenny Atkinson, pretty solid coach. I think he'd have a lot of fun coaching the Bucks because ultimately that's how it's going to work. That's the type of style he likes to have. Sorry, I'm reading some of these comments here. Keep leaving some comments. I like reading them. Spiral here says teams have time to make adjustments and Bud never switched things up. The timing is rough personally, but you can't allow possible replacements get hired. Yeah, I get that, Spiral, but what's he supposed to do? Like, big part of the reason they lost the series is they couldn't contain Duncan Robinson off of dribble handoffs. What's he supposed to do? Is he supposed to have Brook Lopez play up at the level of the screen? Have you seen Brook Lopez move left and right? Like, he's found a lot of success with the players he's had. So, I don't know. I think that you're kind of not looking at some of the issues that the Bucks had on their roster and just the fact that Giannis literally missed almost half the series, basically half the series, and we're just going to brush past that like that's not a big deal. I just completely disagree with that mindset and the fact that he had all this personal stuff going on in his life, really serious personal stuff that was out of his control. I just think it's really kind of a quick judgment move by them that I wouldn't necessarily defend. Justice here says, who's your best guess on who's next? Just joined a minute ago. Well, Justice, welcome here. I think Nick Nurse is going to be considered a front runner for the position. I think Nick Nurse is a very, very good head coach. And I think that defensively he would do a lot of fun stuff with Milwaukee. I think if Nick Nurse is hired, you're going to see Milwaukee look to add a kind of a more versatile center. Maybe keep Brook Lopez, but add another big who can move a little bit laterally. Give them another option. Because right now they just lack that in terms of another rim protector who can move in lateral ways. Like even a Nerlens Noel, not that he's going to be a nice big-time addition, but he would make a little bit of a movement type of player on the perimeter that can defend and move in space a little bit. So I think realistically there's some options out there outside of Nick Nurse, though. Kenny Atkinson, I would be surprised if Becky Hammond doesn't get an interview for this position. I think she'd be a qualified candidate for this job. I also think that in-house candidate Charles Lee would definitely get some consideration here for this too. Maybe Adrian Griffin from the Toronto Raptors. He's an assistant coach there, or at least was with Nick Nurse. I think that he would get some consideration here too. A lot of the same typical candidates that we've seen, maybe even Chris Quinn from the Miami Heat. He's one of the top assistants out there that people are going to consider and executives are going to look at as a potential head coaching candidate this offseason. I wouldn't be completely shocked by something like that, especially since Miami just knocked Milwaukee out. True Talk says, really, people, nobody has a heart. This is why the Bucks are doomed. Giannis missed the series, and Budenholzer, I bet you won't care either if he... Oh, okay, I'm not going to say that on stream, but yeah. Ryan here says, they did fire coach, but I was wondering if they would. Yeah, I think it's just... I don't know. I just think it's a tough time to do that. I think, like, again, this is not me thinking as a basketball guy saying, well, I don't think Mike Budenholzer is a perfect coach. I think there's definite flaws to him as a coach, but given the circumstances and given what his roster was, like, you can't just expect him all of a sudden to have Brook Lopez playing 25 feet away from the hoop trying to cover Duncan Robinson. And without Giannis on the floor for half the series, who's supposed to be out there? Bobby Portis? I mean, I don't know. The guy didn't have his best player for half the series and was going through some really serious personal stuff. So I think that there's some issues with the way that they were looking at this. Spiral here says, I will agree that it's not solely his fault. Front office didn't upgrade the roster well at all. I'm just saying, yeah, I think so too. Like, I agree with that. I just, like, if we're trying to rationalize why if he should be fired or not for some of those, like the fact that he won a championship 2 years ago, like, I just don't think that we can really make a clean argument that he should be fired based on postseason stuff. Like, every coach has flaws. Even Steve Kerr has significant flaws, and he's won 4 titles in the last 8 years. There's serious flaws for every single coach. Oh boy, Garrett here with maybe one of the worst takes. Stan Van Gundy would be the best fit for now. Stan Van Gundy should not coach in the NBA again. And the last few stops he's had have been terrible. He completely destroyed the Detroit Pistons when he was also given, for some reason, management ability to make roster decisions, and he traded for he went out and made a big trade for Blake Griffin in the back end of his career. So I don't really know why Stan Van Gundy would be considered. He also lasted only 1 year in New Orleans and got fired. So they're still paying him, but no. It's Gimli said, we need a threat from beyond the arc. The Bucks are too one-dimensional. Yeah, they just need more shooting. I think this is a big offseason for the Bucks because you're looking at Chris Middleton. You're looking at a whole bunch of different situations that could play out. Brook Lopez goes to free agency. Middleton has a player option that could lead him toward free agency. Now you have a head coaching vacancy, and there's maybe a little bit of pressure on Milwaukee to at some point make some type of decision. It's funny, I had already recorded a positive outlook video, and Milwaukee was in there, and that's scheduled for next week. So maybe, just maybe, I should try and go back and make some revisions. I probably won't, though, because I still feel pretty confident about what I said in that video. But luckily I didn't mention Budenholzer as the coach, because things change in the NBA. They change very, very often and very quickly. And Spiral, this is partially my point of, like, I'm just surprised that they did this, because I think the timing does really complicate the situation. And the fact that they just fired him here without, like, I don't know. It just seems pretty crazy. Like, I don't know. You have to have a pretty good indication that you feel like there's an upgrade out there for you as a head coach. And, like, I think there's better coaches available, yes, but does that mean, like, Milwaukee's going to go win the finals next year if they get a new head coach? Probably not. Like, I mean, even we've seen with Boston, like, going from Ime Udoka to Joe Mazzulla, even though Mazzulla, I think, is a great coach and somebody who I knew was going to be a good coach even before they made him the long-term head coach, it doesn't mean it's an upgrade. And obviously, I'm not saying that this Udoka situation is the same as Budenholzer's. It's completely different. But just sometimes the coaching change just doesn't mean you're all of a sudden better. It might just mean you're kind of laterally moving and you're kind of the same team. Sometimes you get worse. Sometimes you do get better. But, like, right now, I really like Nick Nurse. I think Nick Nurse is a great coach. If he's the hire, do I think the Bucks win a championship next year? I'm not, like, convinced on that. So that's, you know, if you're making the decision on that, I'm just not really there for it. Garrett says he took the Magic to the finals. Let me get this up on the screen. He took the Magic to the finals. Yeah, that was like a decade and a half ago, 2009, 14 years ago. He took the Magic to the finals, and then since then, teams realized there's a 3-point line, and Stan Van Gundy's never recovered. Deadly Content says Portland and Milwaukee talk. No, Giannis is not getting traded to Portland. Sorry, Deadly Content. I know you're a big time Blazers fan, but no, Giannis is not going anywhere. He is going to be a Milwaukee Buck. Justice here says, realistically, do you think they're going to do more drastic changes this offseason because of firing Coach Bud? To be honest, to give you, like, a really good, like, sound, solid answer, I would have to actually spend more time and rationalize what's out there for that. I haven't done a Bucks offseason preview yet. I'm glad that I waited, because now I can kind of center it around the head coaching position that's open now. But just my quick answer is, it's not going to be, like, anything absolutely crazy. Like, Drew Holiday's going to be there. I would expect Giannis to be there. Obviously, Bud is out. But then really the question becomes Middleton, what's going on with him. Portis will probably be back. But then you're looking at Brook Lopez, and depending on which coach they hire, we might have a good indication what they would do with Brook, because if they hire a coach who wants to be switchable and get out and run, those are things Brook Lopez does not do, although he's a phenomenal rim protector, one of the best drop coverage bigs in the league. Both him and Rudy Gobert are probably the two best in that regard. So I think that there's, a good argument to be had that they could make some drastic changes if you consider losing Middleton and losing Brook. Drastic changes. I think that is drastic change, but it's also possible that they keep one of the two guys, which then I would say this is less drastic. And depending on what happens, they might have been in line anyway to do some of these things where it's possible that Chris Middleton just gets a really nice offer in free agency that the Bucks weren't willing to give him, and then you have a change that way. So just regardless, I think there's a lot of things that could shift that maybe don't really hinge on Bud being there or not, but there's just changes. The franchise was kind of at a mesh point here where they had to make some long-term roster decisions on some older players in Brook Lopez and Chris Middleton, and it's possible that they had maybe a plan in place already, which is why maybe Budenholzer gets canned here too, but I'm not exactly certain. It's Gimli here says maybe Dame and Giannis team up in Wisconsin. I don't see that either. I know that there's some Damian Lillard talk out there right now. The Bucks still owe some assets to New Orleans for the Drew Holiday trade, so it's harder for me to see what they would theoretically offer to Portland to get a deal done. They don't have access to all of their picks, which is something I think would be important in Damian Lillard trade discussions. They also don't have a lot of young, intriguing players. They have a couple, right? Like Marjan Beauchamp's, I think, pretty good. Young player, but they don't have a ton to throw around. So realistically, I think Dame probably does not end up in Milwaukee, but I know that there is like the reports out about Giannis potentially wanting to have gone to Portland in the past. And I understand kind of the pairing between those two. I think they'd be great together, but I just don't really see it coming to fruition, especially since if Portland's trading Dame, they're not going to have interest in signing and trading for Chris Middleton. I just think that's kind of a weird sideways move, honestly. Ryan Hillier says the Raptors breakdown vid was amazing, bro. Great job, by the way. Appreciate that, Ryan. Make sure you guys do check out some of the offseason previews. Breaks down a lot of the stuff that we're talking about here a little bit, but more in depth, a little bit more thought out. This is kind of reactionary of like, wow, Mike Budenholzer is fired. As you can see, again, we're going to go back to that quickly. Adrian Wojnarowski reporting the Milwaukee Bucks dismissed coach Mike Budenholzer, sources tell ESPN. Budenholzer is out after the East top seed, again, number one seed, first time in his tenure with the Bucks that they were the one seed, suffered a first-round loss to the Miami Heat, which is absolutely crazy and not what I was expecting to read today, but there we are. Let's look over at Jessica Brown. She says, thoughts about Nick Nurse. Can't see the Bucks taking a gamble on a coach who's never been a head coach. Too bad Udoka is taken. Yeah, Udoka would have been awesome. Udoka's style would have been really perfect for this team, honestly, but obviously he is now in Houston, which means he is not available for this position. And because of that, it's very likely that we could see Nick Nurse land here, which is one of the few options left. I don't think Detroit will hire Nick Nurse. I think Detroit's going with a first-time head coach, whether that is Charles Lee or Adrian Griffin. Those are the top two candidates based on my intel, my understanding of the current situation. But realistically, I think with the Bucks here, what they're really looking for is a coach with a plan. So it's going to come down to whoever presents the best in interviews. It could be Nick Nurse, but if there's some first-time head coach, even though I think that there's a little bit of a risk there. We've seen that in the past with some teams hiring a first-time head coach and it just doesn't go well. You could make the same argument about people who've coached before. Dwayne Casey for the Pistons, when they hired him, just didn't work out clearly. Stan Van Gundy in his last two stops did not work out. There's a bunch of candidates out there that have been like that where they get hired, but sometimes head coaches take a break, they come back, and like Mike Brown, they have a great first year with the team. So it just kind of depends, and it's going to come down to who interviews well, which is how it should, because if they have a good plan in place and they use video evidence and say, look, I can do this with this team, I can do this with this player on this roster, and you have like good foundational support that the GM and the ownership group believe in, that's what gets you those types of jobs. Mark Friedman here says, how about Cat with the Bucks? I just don't really see that. Again, the Wolves and Bucks are just not going to be able to get a deal done on something like that because Cat, I understand like the offensive fit next to Giannis, but again, the Wolves would want draft picks. The Bucks don't really have that much stuff to offer, so I just don't really see it getting done though. Thanks for the comment though, Mark. Really do appreciate that. Craig here says the Raptors video was good. Follow Samson Folk for great Raptors insight. All right, I guess we're doing shout outs here on the channel for some reason. Craig Robb says if they can get Chris on a 110 4 years, they'll be back in the mix next year. Yeah, do I think he's going to sign for $27.5 million? Probably not. And he has a player option for like 40. So is he really going to take a $13 million pay cut next season to get more long-term money? Maybe, but I don't know. I think this is closer to what Chris Middleton's looking for, and I think in free agency he probably at least gets 4 years, 130. So it just makes it hard to rationalize them keeping Middleton at this point for me, unless it's on a big number like what you said. Justice here says, I know you're a fellow Mavs fan. I'm really down for the Middleton to Mavs. Curious to know what you think. I love Chris Middleton as a player. Obviously, I love the Dallas Mavericks. The two of them are not a good fit. They would have been a good fit 2 years ago when they still had Kristaps Porzingis. They need a big man. If they're gonna make some big move, if they're gonna do something big, they need somebody who can block shots and get rebounds and deter people at the rim. The Mavericks, I understand the idea of get more perimeter talent, and that's what it's not necessarily what wins in this league, because when you can't rebound the basketball, you can't generate second chances, and you can't keep the other team from getting second chances, you're probably not winning very many games. So for me, I think it would be a disaster, especially if they give up draft picks to get him, because they'd have to likely facilitate a sign and trade unless Kyrie, if Kyrie walks in free agency and they use cap space for Middleton, I'm not even mad about that. That's a different scenario, I think. But I think Kyrie's going to be back. So I don't know. Middleton, he's good. I really like him. I think he'd make the Mavericks better, but I don't think he addresses the flaws that the Mavericks really need to address. But the issue here is, and I'm going to be very clear on this, Nico Harrison runs the Mavericks like it's an NBA 2K team, and it doesn't matter what position a guy plays as long as he has a high overall rating. That's just not the reality of real NBA basketball. Team balance, actual team building requires insight as to what your team lacks and what they need, and another scorer is not really what the Mavericks need. They need guys who can knock down perimeter shots. They need guys who can defend on the perimeter, stay in front of somebody, and they also need somebody who can, for the first time probably since Tyson Chandler, protect the rim and rebound the darn ball, because they just don't do any of those things right now. Spiral here says, on a personal level, I agree with you. I would hope the front office and ownership had to have discussions about this and but agree to it. If this is just a sole front office decision, then that hurts their image like Boston and IT. That's exactly my point, which is why I'm surprised they landed on this. And based off of Woj's reporting here saying that Milwaukee dismissed him, makes it sound like it was a one-sided decision, which is why I've kind of had the reaction that I've had so far. Which is why I was very surprised about this overall situation kind of playing out the way that it did. Happy Face here says, so the head coach got Giannis hurt and made him miss 3 games, scapegoating. Yeah, it's really a lot of scapegoating here. You didn't have your best player, and before the playoffs, I could have told you Miami was a dangerous playoff team. They have been. They always will be when Jimmy Butler's playing there. It's just not that complex. I said before the playing games that Boston should really hope to not face Miami in round 1, because I thought Miami was going to beat Atlanta. Ultimately did not happen that way, but now Miami's still playing and Atlanta's not. And it's because Miami is a significantly better team than Atlanta was, and they're just a better team than a lot of other teams that were seeded higher than them. And yes, they took the regular season off. They played very lazily. Kyle Lowry's on a terrible contract, this, that, and the other thing, whatever. They're good at basketball, and they can defend, and they've got a smart head coach. And because of that, they're a really tough out. And when you don't have your best player, one of the best players in the world, if not the best player, you're in a really, really tough spot going forward trying to win that series. Jay Peach here says, Sam Cassell has entered the chat. That would be an interesting hire. Larry Hoover here wants to know who would be your ideal coaching staff, 1 head coach and 2 assistants. This is a great question. I like Sean Sweeney as a defensive-minded head coach. I think he accomplished a lot. Not as my ideal head coach, but or I meant to say more of a defensive coordinator type of assistant, where he runs your team defense. That's what makes the most sense to me. For a guy like him, I think you'd be able to get him as an assistant, but he is the top assistant in Dallas, so you'd have to pay him more. But I'm just guessing he's not going to get a head coaching look this year, just with the season the Mavericks had. It's not his fault that they don't have any defensive players. He's trying his best with that team, and the fact that they're not dead last every single game is impressive to me. And then secondly, for a head coach, Nick Nurse would be my hire. I think Nick Nurse is a very good coach and somebody who would have a lot of success coaching this Bucks team. But again, I can't guarantee it's a championship, but it probably gets them pretty close. Brent here says, Cat to the Knicks is more likely the Knicks have picks and players they can dump without compromising their title goals. Yeah, I understand from the asset standpoint and, they need a good player that can fit, whatever. Last time Tom Thibodeau coached Karl Anthony Towns, he lasted in Minnesota for 2.5 years and got fired, and they won a total of 1 playoff game, and it drove Jimmy Butler out of town as well. So I don't know. I don't really think so. Chong here says prediction for tonight's game. Tonight is Suns Nuggets, right? I've been working on videos all day pretty much, so I need to pull up the playoff schedule. Oh yeah, so we got Lakers Warriors. Yeah, it's Lakers Warriors tonight. Okay. Warriors win. I think it's 17 straight games that the home team, if they lose game 1, it's 17 straight game 2s that they come back and win. We saw it with the Celtics. They obliterated the Sixers in game 2. So I think probably bet the Warriors tonight is just a safe bet. It's Gimli says, is there any free agents the summer Bucks should look at? I have a video up on the channel, all 202 NBA free agents. Took me so much time to put that together, hours upon hours. It's about an hour-long video, but it goes through pretty much every guy I could see signing a minimum contract, guys on the taxpayer mid-level, just in general, the full mid-level. Also covers guys who would be signed using either cap space or bird rights. So that video covers literally everybody, including two-way players as well. So make sure to go check that one out. A lot of work in that video, so go enjoy that one. Jessica says, have no idea why, but I feel like Scott Brooks could be a dark horse. Scott Brooks, interesting. That would be an interesting hire. I hope not. I don't think Scott Brooks is that good of a head coach, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. Happy Face here says, Mavs need rim protection and defense for sure. Yes, they do. Brent says, Cam Johnson will be an interesting pickup for some team. Whom? I think the Nets keep him. They have restricted rights on him. I don't think he'll go anywhere. He could sign an offer sheet with another team, but the Brooklyn Nets will match it probably no matter what. Sean here says, at the end of the day, Budenholzer should have stepped back if he knew his head wasn't in the right space. I think any coach at the end of the day would have called a timeout with 0.5 seconds left. Sean, I understand your point, but he literally, I just don't need to keep reinforcing what I'm saying here. I don't know if you understand, Sean, the level of personal stuff he was dealing with, and should he have taken a step back from the team? Probably he should have, but I'm sure in his head he wanted to try and pull his mind away from where it probably was at. I'm sure you've done something like that, where you try and do something to keep your mind busy and not think about some of the things that you're dealing with in life. And I'm sure that's what he was trying to do, and I'm sure that it just didn't pan out well. I think those are all very realistic things to consider and think here, without just absolutely nailing a guy to the cross for losing one playoff series that, yeah, he probably should have won, but he also didn't have his best player for half of it. So Mark here says, would you trade Young, Collins for Lopez, Allen, Middleton, 3 firsts, 2 seconds? No, if I'm Atlanta, I'm not doing that. I just don't think Trae Young's going to be available to Milwaukee here. 407 says, who's the Bucks coach when they won the NBA Finals? It was this guy on the screen, Mike Budenholzer. And not even 24 months later, he's fired. It's absolutely insane. Absolutely insane. And people will justify it because he lost one playoff series. Because for some reason, we have this whole results-based way of thinking. Whereas, could we just acknowledge that, Spoelstra had a great coaching series and Budenholzer was going through some personal stuff and their best player was out? Does it mean he needs to get his head chopped off right now and fired? In my opinion, no, he does not. But that's what the Bucks decided. Chong here. D'Lo has a player option in that, which I believe he has a player option. I need to go back and look. There's 202 free agents. I'm sure he might have been in there, but maybe just go back and check. And if I missed it, then that's a bad whoops. But it's D'Angelo Russell. I couldn't care less about D'Angelo Russell, honestly. Now that I say that, he'll go for 12 points tonight, and people like him a lot. Larry here says, since I'm from Europe, I highly recommend you to watch the final game of the Real Madrid Partizan series in the EuroLeague quarterfinals. Great tactical battle on every possession. Well, yeah, thanks for sharing that with me. EuroLeague does have a lot of interesting stuff that they do. A lot of EuroLeague stuff actually finds its way over to the NBA after quite a while. Obviously, I'm sure all of you have heard of Spain pick and roll. Europe has some very interesting strategies when it comes to scoring the basketball. They play with a much slower pace, so you have to be a lot more creative. You get less transition looks. So there's always stuff coming over from there that has some interesting tactics. Rio says, showing love from Toronto, Canada. Welcome, Rio. Glad to have you in here. Jessica says, have no idea why I said Scott Brooks. I meant Terry Stotts. Stotts makes a lot of sense. Scott Brooks does not. I don't like Scott Brooks as a coach, but I think Terry Stotts, I think Portland's an example of how it's not very easy to win with small guards. And Terry Stotts was winning a lot with small guards, to be honest. So I think that he is an underrated coach for sure. Young Indy here says Spoelstra stays, getting coaches fired. They do, and oftentimes when these coaches get fired, it doesn't really change the team that much, and it usually does not make them that much better. You think about, like, I don't know, think about Frank Vogel. Like, he got fired for last year's Lakers team, and then they start the year with Darvin Ham, and they start 2-10, and you might say, oh, Darvin Ham's doing a great job. No, it's almost like the roster and having like a GM who knows what he's doing, building your team. Like, when the team fits, they might win, and when the team doesn't fit, they probably lose. Like, I don't know. Coaches just get pissed on for no reason by people and get blamed for everything, when sometimes it's just like players need to execute, and sometimes the team's not built very well, which is what happened in Toronto this year with Nick Nurse. I mean, he had a whole bunch of guys who can't shoot the ball, and they expected him to win. Rio wants to talk about trading coaches. Actually, that is allowed. Look up Doc Rivers traded to the Los Angeles Clippers. Trades for coaches actually do happen, and it's possible to see that, but I don't think we'll see that here. I would just be kind of surprised. Dad here says Giannis didn't seem to back Bud up too much after the Heat series. Like, I get it, but just because you don't back someone up, like, I know he made the comments about it's the coaching staff's decision to switch stuff. And you know, honestly, Giannis might have had an impact on this too. I'm not saying he did or didn't, but I'm saying I wouldn't be shocked if he did. But I just don't think it's like 100% justified to just fire him, especially some of the stuff he had going on in his personal life. I mean, it's the Bucks' decision. They're the ones still paying out his contract after this. But I don't know. I don't love it. Spiral here says, weren't the Cavs interested in THA after trading for Mitchell? That could help the Mavs free up cap space, possibly. Yeah, the only thing, though, is if the Mavs were to trade Tim Hardaway Jr. but re-sign Kyrie Irving, they still don't really have cap space. They'd have like $8 million or something. It depends on what Kyrie's number would end up looking like, but I think the best way for Dallas to have cap space is to lose Wood, lose Kyrie, trade THJ for like nothing, but the Cavs can't do that because they're over the cap. So really, like, Dallas is only going to have like decent amount of cap space if they lose Kyrie and Wood, which then you're trying to replace those guys and you don't even get better. So it's just, you know, tough. It's kind of a tough situation. Hartheimer says, can New York trade Brunson for LaMelo? No, that's not going to happen. Brett wants to know, will the Lakers bring back Malik Beasley? I think at $15 million is kind of a tough call. If they're bringing back Beasley, they're bringing back D'Lo. But if they decline the option on Beasley, then they're probably not bringing back D'Lo and making a run at somebody in free agency is what I see. It's like kind of a both or nothing type of deal right now, just based on how their pick and roll, like just based, or excuse, I was reading another comment, just based on how their like cap space flexibility is going to work this summer. And Spiral, just for Cleveland as well, just so you know, Cavs offseason preview coming out tomorrow. So we actually talk about Tim Hardaway Jr. in that video, which is funny that you brought him up here. Larry here says Spanish pick and roll was invented by the now head coach of Partizan and European GOAT, Željko Obradović, I think is how you pronounce that. That's interesting. I did not know that he was the originator of it. But ultimately, that's one of the best set designs in basketball history, just because it's like absolutely. I mean, it's just genius because you use a small guy typically to pin a big guy going back toward the basket where nobody can see him, and typically guards don't have to talk through screens as much as bigs do. I mean, it's just genius because even if you do get a switch there and the guy talks, you're getting a big guy rolling downhill with a small guy likely picking him up. So, I mean, it's pretty creative. It's one of the better ideas, and you can run a whole bunch of stuff off of it. You can just turn the Spain into a pin down if you're really thinking, and there's a lot of smart things to do out of it. So I like it. Brent here says, I like Naz Reid. Naz Reid is really good. I think Naz Reid's a nice addition for a team. I think he'll get paid very decently as well, Reid, and I do agree with that. Here, Greg here says, Bud won 60 games with the Hawks. Can't act like he's not a great coach. He is. I think Bud's a really good coach because some of the things he does really well, his teams typically give up very little in transition, both when he was coaching Atlanta and in Milwaukee. Of course, when you have Giannis, it's definitely a little bit easier to limit some transition baskets. But also his teams are high-volume three-point shooting teams. And for the first time really in a while, the Bucks did a good job this year actually limiting above-the-break threes. Typically, their defense over the last few years was more so let's contain the paint and guard corner threes, and will allow teams to just hoist above-the-break threes. It happened last year with Grant Williams, part of the reason why they lost to the Boston Celtics in the way that they did, because Grant Williams caught fire because he was given a lot of open looks. and they made that adjustment coming into this year, and you had to have felt pretty good. They were my favorite to win the East for a decent amount of the year. Them and Boston were the two strongest candidates, in my opinion. Obviously, I don't think that's rocket science for anybody. But, just given everything that happened, Giannis missing half the series, Bud going through what he went through, I just can't really blame them for losing, honestly, because at the end of the day, we're just at a spot where stuff happens and you lose a series. It's not the end of the world, honestly. Rio here says, any predictions on who's leaving the Raptors realistically? I think Fred VanVleet will really look to leave. Jakob Poeltl definitely will not. And then I'm kind of 50-50 on Gary Trent Jr. at this point. Luke here says, Bucks better get a coach who will make the right adjustments in the playoffs. Yeah, I mean, it's easy to say that. This is the one thing, though, too, is sometimes you can make the right adjustments, and sometimes your players just don't do it, and they don't execute it right. As someone who coaches, I can tell my players to do all the things that they need to do to win, but sometimes they just don't do it, which I'm not, knocking them. They're players, but that's just the reality of it. And sometimes, you have good rationale, and things just don't play out the way that you expect them to. And, what are you supposed to do with Jimmy Butler going off for 50? You have Drew Holiday on him. That's supposed to be one of the best perimeter defenders in the world, and I believe that he is one of the best. If you look over and say, oh, it's Drew Holiday guarding Jimmy Butler, do you really feel terrible about that matchup? Now, maybe do you want to switch some stuff? Yeah. But, making the right adjustments is so, I just don't think that's really the right word, because you can make the correct adjustments and have it still not work out, because sometimes people make crazy shots. For example, you could leave a 20% three-point shooter wide open, and if he's having a good night, maybe goes 4 for 4, and you lose by 2 points from 3. You get what I'm saying? That it just stuff happens like that. Everyone was saying how Boston, Joe Mazzulla did a terrible job in game 1 because Harden went crazy. It's sometimes it's just James Harden, and what are you supposed to do with 8 seconds left in the game? Go double him and leave the best passer in a spot where he can pass to an advantage and have him play 4-on-3 in a 1-point game? I think that there's some issues in there with that. Spiral here says, I'll rephrase what I said earlier. Bud isn't a bad coach. He's just bad at adjusting. He's really good at making systems that work for his roster. Yeah, and I agree with this. He does stick with what he likes to do, and I understand why, because he finds a lot of success doing those things. By no means, I hope I haven't come across saying that Budenholzer is a perfect coach, because he's not at all. But I think he's a good coach, and it's sometimes really hard in the NBA to find a good coach, someone who is just consistently good, wins a bunch of regular season games, helps you print a ton of money because you sell a lot of home seats, and you make the postseason, you sell playoff tickets. And I mean, there's been a lot of franchises. Think about Chris Finch is the second most winning coach in Minnesota Timberwolves history. He's coached there for 2.5 years. That's just kind of the reality of NBA coaching, is it's not as easy to consistently win as a guy like Budenholzer makes it look when it comes to regular season games. Ryan here wants to know, is Mikal Bridges an all-star next season? Probably. Rio says, so no OG and Anunoby. I'm 50-50 on him too. Siakam's not going to get traded. Obviously, Barnes will be there. For OG, it just the Raptors are going to have to get blown away by an offer to do something, but I'm not completely ruling it out at all. So we'll see. Brady Thompson says, what's up? Do you think Mike D'Antoni ends up coming back for a team? I hope not. I'm so tired of Mike D'Antoni, still from those Rockets teams when James Harden would get all of the blame, when by game 7 of a series, everybody knows, oh, well, here's another James Harden isolation. And people act like, oh, that's all James Harden's decision. And Mike D'Antoni gets into an interview and says, well, I have to let James be James. No, it's your job as a coach to coach. So I think Mike D'Antoni, probably one of the worst coaches to ever win Coach of the Year. I understand he was, very, progressive with the 7 seconds or less offense in Phoenix. Yeah, but everywhere he's gone where he doesn't have a mega superstar, a guy who's a top 5 player in the world, at the time he's coaching him, he loses. Look at his time in LA when, kind of post-prime Kobe. You think back to his time in New York with post-prime Melo. It just, what did he do? Mr. Papercut says, Bud being fired is tragic. By the same measure, Pop would have been fired after not winning in 2000 and 2001 after winning in 1999. We all know what happened after they won 4 more titles. Exactly. That's like, not that Budenholzer is the same as Popovich here. I'm not like agreeing with that portion of things, but like the situation is semi-similar where it's like you're gonna have ups and downs throughout the course of a coach's tenure somewhere, and Milwaukee's like reluctance to look past some of the personal stuff he's dealing with and the fact that Giannis missed half the series is just kind of interesting to me, honestly. It's interesting. James here says, who do you think will pick up Bud? I think he'll probably be an assistant in San Antonio. I could also see him being an assistant for one of the job openings for, one of these teams that don't have a head coach right now. If they hire like a first-time head coach and they're looking for some, like a veteran coach to coach alongside him, kind of give him some pointers along the way. Like if Detroit hires a first-time head coach or Toronto does, like could Budenholzer as a very highly paid assistant make sense? I think so. Spiral says, would the Mavs trade their pick in a possible deal for Bojan Bogdanovic? I hope not. I just really hope not. Bojan Bogdanovic is not worth a draft pick, in my opinion. Chronicle here says, Bud was supposed to be fired after or before Giannis saved the Bucks season in the bubble. This is a long time coming. I mean, okay. I just, I understand, like, that this has not been like a one all of a sudden out of nowhere thing. There's been discussions about this for a while. There's been rumors about this for a while, like over the course of years, but the guy wins. I don't know. Like sometimes teams get like really antsy about stuff and doesn't always mean you're better on the other side. Doesn't always mean you're better on the other side. BB Mute Man says, Raiden, there's a ton of money for someone who that doesn't make them a contender. I want to see what answer this is too. I don't even see Raiden's comment here, so I'm trying to find it. OM Ragey says, do you think firing Mike was an overreaction? Yes, like, and no. So I want to be clear here. I don't think Mike Budenholzer is like this phenomenal, perfect coach that's going to be this awesome, like, you can't fire him. There's no way in the world you can fire him. But I just think, like, if you fire him, you better have a pretty good plan in place of like, oh, this is probably who we're going to hire, and this makes sense because this, and that. But I don't know. Like for Budenholzer, if you're firing him and you're placing him with a first-time head coach who, I don't know. There's upside to it, but there's also serious downside to it. And we've seen the downside play out for other teams in the past. Think about the Pacers when they before they hired Rick Carlisle. Rio says, if the Raptors put up a poll of Becky Hammond and Kenny Atkinson for a vote, which one do you think most people would prefer, Becky or Kenny? I think Becky Hammond would probably win that vote, just given it's in Toronto. Darren here says, what does firing the Pistons, Rod Murphy, have on the Pistons? What impact does it have? I'm kind of confused by your question here, honestly. Like what you're trying to say. I think you're missing like a verb in there or something, or maybe I'm just misreading it too on stream, but sometimes that happens. I get a little nervous. It's just like some misconduct stuff from last year. So like what impact does it have? Probably not that much, because at the end of the day, Troy Weaver's the decision maker. Justin Archer says the Bucks should go for Ime Udoka. He's already a head coach for the Houston Rockets. Okay, here, Raiden says 5-year, $150 million is the number getting floated around right now inside the Blazers for Grant. I don't think Grant's going to sign that, to be honest. I think Grant is going to ask for more money, and I think that's a disaster. Even at $30 million in a year, I feel disgusted a bit for that, because I understand people are going to pull up his stats and say, oh, look, he shot this percentage from three, and he, gets a block or half a block a game, and he scores 20 points. Where has he gone that has gotten like significantly better with him? What team? Are we going to point to the bubble Denver Nuggets and say, that's it, that's why he's worth everything? He went to Detroit. The Pistons were terrible. He went to Portland. They didn't get any better. Like, I don't know. I'm kind of out on the whole Jeremy Grant thing, honestly. Delio says Nick Nurse. I think that is a very likely outcome here. Brent here says, who wants to sign Westbrook? I think the Clippers would like to retain him. I wouldn't rule out the Phoenix Suns as a potential option for him. I know that probably sounds a little crazy, but maybe a reunion with Kevin Durant actually does make some sense. Jay here says, any thoughts on Kyrie possibly becoming the new point guard for the Phoenix Suns in a sign trade with your beloved Mavs for DeAndre Ayton? If the Suns pull that off, it's a huge win because DeAndre Ayton is another player I'm very much out on. I think Ayton's not a bad player. I think he's going to be a solid scorer, somebody who probably puts up 15 to 16 points a game for a decent portion of his career. He's going to have the rebounding volume that makes him look like a good rebounder. I don't know. I'm out on it. I don't like DeAndre Ayton. The Suns would do really well in that. Kyrie Irving's a fantastic fit skill-wise there, but I don't know. If you're Phoenix and you just watched what happened in Brooklyn, are you signing up for Kyrie plus Kevin Durant? I don't know. I don't think Kevin Durant's going to really sign up for Kyrie Irving either. So I think Russell Westbrook in Phoenix would actually be a little bit more likely than Kyrie Irving. Ayton will be gone here, says Brent Burnett. Yeah, he should be. I still love what Indiana did, kind of handcuffing Phoenix last offseason. That was genius move by Kevin Pritchard, their GM. Very, very genius. And Rio here says Westbrook I could see on Chicago. Makes sense. Reunion with Billy Donovan. Big city. Kind of fits the whole thing Russell Westbrook would be looking for. But this has been the live stream. I don't really think there's a lot more to talk about here. I do agree with this. Hornets need to fire Steve Clifford and hire Bud. Yeah. That's a great point here, Spiral. Like, Bud goes to Charlotte, and they're probably a playoff team somehow, just because he figures out ways to mitigate terrible stretches of basketball because he just has a good understanding, really good basis of what his team does, really good structure, really good overall scheme. Even when he doesn't stray from it, for the most part, there's good sound reasoning behind a lot of that. Like, Clifford needs to be gone regardless. I completely agree with that. And then Budenholzer would be a big-time upgrade and just like a really stable coach that they could use. Hardheimer here says LeBron first player head coach in a long time. Not happening, but that would be insane. Brent Burnett says Bud to the Hornets. I like it, to be honest. I like it. Smith says Utility Sports is the smartest NBA dude. Well, I appreciate that. I probably am not. I'm kind of a little rattled too, if you guys can tell from this live stream. I've been recording a bunch of videos. I'm actually going on vacation here. So I'm recording videos days in advance to try and set everything up so that there's still daily uploads while I'm gone. So if you aren't subscribed, make sure to do so you don't miss out on those uploads and all the hard work I'm putting in. But secondly, my brain's just a little fried. So all of a sudden, I look down at my phone and I see, Mike Budenholzer's no longer the head coach of the Milwaukee Bucks. And I say, okay, I better start streaming. So it's been a crazy little turn of events here, but I hope that you guys did enjoy this live stream. I had a lot of fun. I'm going to get back to recording some of those videos, trying to set myself up for my vacation so that I'm all set. There's a lot of fun videos on the channel. In fact, I'm going to even tell you guys some of the videos coming out because you guys, since you're tuning into the live stream, get a little bit of insider information here. So let's tease some of those videos real quick for what's coming out over the next couple days. Tomorrow is a Cleveland Cavaliers offseason preview. I believe that's tomorrow. Yep. And then over the weekend, I've got some fun stuff planned, including a New Orleans Pelicans offseason preview. Next week, I have a best futures in the NBA that features 11 teams that I think have the best futures moving forward. Disclaimer, the Milwaukee Bucks are in there. I'm not going to go back and edit that video because the reason I have them in there is still true, in my opinion. But with where that currently sits, that's coming out next Tuesday. And then next Wednesday is the worst futures in the NBA. So a lot of fun content hopefully coming out over the next couple days. You guys get a little bit of an insider information. So really appreciate you guys. Make sure you guys subscribe to the channel if you are new. Would really, really love to have you guys be a part of what we do here at Utility Sports. You guys put the U in utility. So huge shout out to you guys. Thanks for stopping in. Let me know your final thoughts on Mike Budenholzer getting fired. I always love reading what you guys have to say. And then go check out some of those other videos, whether it's mock draft, offseason preview. We'll have a Bucks offseason preview probably coming out maybe Sunday now too, because there's a lot of information that's probably going to be breaking on the Bucks within the next hour or two that I would love to cover. So thanks, guys. We'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.